Happy Monday and welcome to Screen Junkies News. You know what that means. We're going to talk about that box office.
That's right.
We have charts. We have Dan Murrell. We're all set.
And we have Ant-Man and we have the Wasp.
And it's a good news, bad news situation for the two of them, for that pair.
And that's, good news and then mixed news, I would say. First of all, #1 movie at the box office, as expected this weekend. It delivers the MCU its 20th straight #1 opening. Every single movie in the MCU is open at #1. Ant-Man and the Wasp does not break that streak. This goes back 10 years. That's pretty remarkable. It opened $30 million higher than the original Ant-Man film, which is also something that you like to see, is that a sequel opens higher than the original film. So that's the good news for Ant-Man.
That is the good news. A little bit of mixed news around how it did in the overall grand scheme of the MCU. I do have a quick question about Kevin Feige for you.
Yes.
Do you feel like after opening weekends, given that they are #1 every single time, he just walks into na-na-na-na-na?
I just assume he does that every day. I mean, why would he ever have a reason to not?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just amazing. But let's talk about Ant-Man as it stands in the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe and what that may or may not mean about its future.
Sure. Well, this is the kind of mixed news, which is, again, it built on the opening of the first one. It opened #1. However, it is still the lowest opening for any Marvel sequel. Looking at these are the part 2s, but this is really any sequel in the MCU domestically. It was beaten out even by The Dark World, which came out in 2013, the second Thor movie.
Which is really sad because, can we say something factually speaking? This is better than that.
I would say I enjoyed this, yeah.
Film is subjective, certainly, but even I'm just talking on a basic structural level, though Ant-Man and the Wasp may have some structural issues. It certainly doesn't have the same ones that one did. In overall characterization, I just think it's a fun movie.
It is. It really, and it's a good time. It's a comedy, and I think, and we'll see how it does worldwide. It had stronger than expected, whereas here domestically, even on Friday, they'd expected it to come in about $7 or $8 million higher than it did. When the actuals came in, it was lower than that. But internationally, it actually did a little better than they thought it would. We'll see. This is another one because of the disruption, both caused by the World Cup and the fact that China is currently in a kind of a blackout period where they're not importing films. Ant-Man and the Wasp is going to come out in China. However, there's no release date set. It's going to hit the UK next month. It's sort of more staggered than it would be usually for a Marvel film. So we'll see how it does internationally. But domestically, when you look at that number, yes, it's building on the first movie, but at the same time, it is lagging behind these other sequels. So I think it's at kind of a tipping point where we'll see, do they try to reinvent it like they did with Thor Ragnarok, where it just the third movie was astronomically higher grossing than the other two, or do they kind of take these two characters, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and say, all right, we've established them, and we'll just from here sort of fold them into the bigger MCU family.
Sort of like Falcon. And
exactly. They'll be featured. They'll be a big part.
Yeah. It's interesting. And again, due respect to those who love Thor: The Dark World. That might be your favorite Marvel movie. No, that's fine. I mean, I think that what Ragnarok did may be an example that they use. And of course, they'll be looking at the total picture once all of the international dollars are in. That said, I know that I'm sort of an outlier in this. I like Ant-Man and I like the Wasp, so I hope that they do that approach. However, I like what Peyton Reed's done with them also, so I'm not sure that would work for the person that's already enjoying what they're doing.
Or you have the third option where you continue to make Ant-Man and the Wasp films and you just budget them accordingly. Essentially saying, okay, we put out 2, we know where the ceiling is or where we think the ceiling is going to be. If we make more than that, that's great, but let's budget based on where we project this movie is going to go financially. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're hamstringing the movie. It just means that you kind of know as you're writing it what your constraints are.
And that's actually my favorite option, not just for this, but in general for a lot of these films, is to budget according to what it really can make. And that way you have a little bit more leeway in terms of being creative in a sense, because you don't have that high risk factor. I hope they go with that, Dan.
We'll see.
Jurassic World and The Incredibles still hanging in there, and more than hanging in there, doing very, very well.
Doing very well. They finished in a virtual tie. I mean, about $200,000 separating them, $28 million plus grosses. They actually, if you looked at the reported estimates yesterday, switched places. Yesterday, Incredibles 2 was reported as the #2 movie of the weekend, and Jurassic World was reported as #3. They were so close that when the actual numbers came out, they flip-flopped, but it's basically a tie. Incredibles 2 is holding really, really well. We'll talk in a minute about it past an important landmark, but Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom also, while it is well behind the pace and continuing to fall further behind the pace of the first Jurassic World movie here, domestically, it has passed the $1 billion mark globally. It's the third movie this year to do so, $1 billion.
It's incredible. Okay. It is incredible in terms of as a sequel, although this was a highly anticipated sequel that we had predicted would make boatloads and just fistfuls of dollars.
Yeah.
Which it certainly has. How far do you think? Let's talk about its legs, Dan.
Sure. I mean, yeah.
I said it first. Does that mean they drink juice?
I don't know. I don't know
I
how
don't know
it
the
works.
rules.
Because, yeah, the story with Jurassic World this weekend is the global box office, but Incredibles 2 has become, as of this past weekend, the highest grossing animated film of all time domestically here in North America. It passes Finding Dory. It is the first animated film to cross the $500 million mark here in North America. It's about $30 million away globally from ousting Coco as Pixar's fifth highest grossing film worldwide. And it's also about $30 million away domestically from ousting Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and becoming the 10th highest grossing film of all time here domestically. So Incredibles 2, we'll see. You know, I talked about China. Coco did phenomenally well in China. Incredibles 2 actually fell off quite a bit in China this weekend. So we're not going to see a repeat performance from that movie the way that we did, the way that Coco did in China. However, it's doing so well domestically, it's sort of making up that side of it over here on this this side of the ocean. So we'll see where it lands as far as the worldwide gross with Pixar movies. But this is a franchise and a movie that has hit phenomenally well domestically here in North America, and kind of one of the few huge $800, $900 billion grossing movies where you see the domestic box office driving it, as opposed to largely, like with Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, the overseas, the international box office driving it.
Thematically, that makes sense. We've talked about before Coco in terms of thematically aligns certainly with the culture in China, but also Incredibles is very American thematically in terms of what it's even the villain and the scope and what they're dealing with. It's very domestic to the United States in certain way and the rest of the world, but I think it's like.
But stylistically it's very set in that kind of 60s retro fashion, But even in terms of, I think, the kind of conflicts they're dealing with, they're global conflicts, but they're ones I think that we're talking about particularly here in a number of ways at this moment in our history. But they are global issues. That said, I do have to wonder what this will mean. We talked about this before. Brad Bird does not necessarily want to do a follow-up. He said he would only do it if he really had a great story idea. I don't remember if it was you or Joe or Spencer that pitched the idea of doing like an Incredibles television series on the Disney streaming service that's coming up, because there clearly is such an appetite. I would not be surprised if they have some people thinking very, very hard how they can capitalize on people's appetites for Elastigirl and the Others. Yes.
Which is what the subtitle of this movie is.
Elastigirl and the Others. That's right. Pretty much should be Incredibles 2, Elastigirl and the Others. Yeah.
The First Purge.
The First
is a
Purge.
movie we talked about this weekend. If you guys want to
it.
check it out with Jacqueline Coley.
That's right. It placed 4th for the weekend. However, it opened on July 4th, which means it has grossed about $31 million total since it came out. I looked at the daily grosses for every movie in the Purge franchise. It is almost identical to the other 3 movies as far as how much money it's made up to this point. So that suggests a final gross between $60 to $80 million domestic. We'll see. Of course, because this is Blumhouse, that means it's going to more than triple its budget, which was about $13 million, and that's not including what it's going to do worldwide. So as Blumhouse does, they made a very modestly budgeted movie. It's doing well. It's not going to be a $100 million grosser, but it is going to be a financial success for Blumhouse and also, everyone else involved with the distribution and making of that movie. So
congratulations.
It's an easy formula. They keep doing it.
Well, we talked about what everybody's talking about in terms of the First Purge, the big themes, the big sort of the idea around this film was that it was the one that hits the sociological messaging that the other ones had attempted. Go check that out if you're interested.
Yeah.
As far as the future of the Purge is concerned, we know they're doing a television show because they embedded that commercial Into the credits.
Into the credits. It's one of the first. It's one of the very few times I've seen a mid-credit scene that is just actually just a straight up.
It's literally
commercial.
an advertisement for a TV series that's coming up on, I think, USA. I really thought it was like a joke at first. I thought it was sort of like
like an inside thing.
the world. Nope, it's a real show.
I wonder if they're going to take that out for like because that's obviously going to be irrelevant.
Yeah.
When it comes out on Blu-ray, I bet they take it out.
I hope they don't.
You hope they keep it in
I
there?
really hope they keep it in.
Like the preview for Back to the Future 3 that's at the end of Back to the Future 2. But when you watch Back to the Future 2, you've already seen it. Yeah. Okay.
I hope they keep it in.
I could see that.
A movie that we listed as one of the best of 2018 so far is Sorry to Bother You. And it did quite well on the per screen.
It did. Per screen average, it hauled in just over $45,000 per screen. That's one of the best per screen hauls of the year. I believe that's just outside the top 5, which we looked at last week. I think it's just under The Death of Stalin. So a strong start for that movie. It's getting a lot of buzz. Boots Riley and company, Lakeith Stanfield, everyone involved with the film, have been out there really publicizing it for quite a while now. It expands to 700 screens this week. I'm very curious to see what a wide audience thinks of this movie. Because it is one of the most complex, challenging, bizarre, funny, disturbing, demented, current movies that I've seen this year. And I'm still processing it. And I've seen it. I saw it a while ago. And I still don't know.
I love this movie.
Yeah.
And we had a guest come in today who said she completely hated it. And I absolutely understand. I really, really respect that opinion because it's not for everyone. It is a film that is, if you don't accept there are two moments that you either accept the conceits and roll into it. But I think if you don't roll into those conceits, then it is sort of like violently lambasting you with its weirdness. You know,
Right.
If you roll into it and accept that this world is what it is, then you follow along, and I think that you might really connect with what it's saying about the world we live in a way that I think is elegant, and very interesting. Highly entertaining, but certainly odd.
Yeah, I would say like it's probably the most original film I've seen this year. But I would say, because the marketing has to market it a certain way, and it's sort of being marketed as a straight up comedy. And I would say it's definitely very funny. Yeah. But just go in if you're planning to see Sorry to Bother You. Just go in not expecting any one particular thing, and I think you may sort of have an easier time as the movie unfolds.
You got to let this movie take you.
Yeah.
You have to let it take you where it's going. It's a ride, and you will be processing it. My favorite kinds of movies are the ones that lend themselves to lots of conversation. So we'll be talking about Sorry to Bother You more in the future. Now we're going to talk about. Look, we talk a lot about the Marvel movies and the blockbusters around here, but that's not necessarily the biggest movie in the world.
That's right. The biggest movie in the world this past weekend was a movie in China. We talk about how July in China is generally blocked out. There are a few exceptions. For example, Skyscraper, The Rock's new movie, is getting a Chinese opening on July 20th next weekend. But generally, July is blocked out for domestic releases in China. And there's a movie called Dying to Survive, which was actually the biggest grossing movie worldwide this past weekend, including previews. It grossed almost $200 million in one weekend. It received a remarkably high audience score from Chinese audiences. I think I read it was the highest audience score for a movie there in almost 16 years. And it's a lot of people are kind of remarking that it's very unique to see this film doing so well because it takes on a very serious societal subject matter. It involves the price of drugs for cancer patients. It's a comedy, but that's kind of what it's based on. So that's a movie, Dying to Survive. We'll see how it does in the weeks ahead. We've seen movies like Wolf Warrior 2, which we talked about last summer, and Detective Chinatown and Monster Hunt 2 and Operation Red Sea that we talked about this year that make so much money. We'll see how Dying to Survive does in the weeks ahead. But like I mentioned, Incredibles 2 took a big hit this past weekend, largely because this movie had a great opening weekend. So we'll see if it's one of those that sort of persists at the box office, or as we see so often in China, has a huge surge on opening weekend and then drops 70%.
Unless you're Wolf Warrior 2.
unless you're Wolf Warrior 2.
This has been a great year for movies so far. I've heard people saying that it's not. I disagree. There's some fabulous movies, and we're not even fully through the year. We're not even in sort of the Oscar season yet, so I'm very delighted. And more so as a person that used to work in documentary myself, this has been a great year for theatrically released documentaries, both financially and aesthetically. I saw Whitney this weekend, and it is phenomenally good.
Very good.
Here's my advice. Whitney will break your heart. This movie, for the first hour of it, you will get physical chills listening to this woman's voice, and you will think about what we've lost. Then for the second hour or so, you will be emotionally devastated and wrecked by the tragedy that was the latter part of her life. That said, I would say go watch Whitney earlier in the day, and then follow that up with a beautiful cleansing release of Won't You Be My Neighbor, which will leave you feeling delighted and very hopeful for humanity. And you know what's interesting is that these documentaries that have done so well, Won't You Be My Neighbor, Whitney, and RBG, all about huge public figures, all incredibly well done, and all have a very different thing to say about our culture. They're also making money, Dan.
They are. This is the summer of the docs. There are 4 documentaries in the top 25 this past weekend, led by, as we mentioned, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which passed RBG as the highest grossing documentary of 2018. You mentioned Whitney, which just came out this past weekend.
Did you love it?
I liked it quite a bit. Also, 3 Identical Strangers, which I saw this weekend, which is don't read anything about it, just go see it. And then Pope Francis, a man of his word, about Pope Francis. That also came out this summer. So we've had 5 documentaries already just this summer here domestically that have cracked the $1 million mark, which for a documentary, you look at that, of course, compared to the Avengers Infinity Wars, that doesn't seem like much. But for a documentary to crack $1 million, I would say the vast, vast, vast majority of them do not do that. They do
don't.
Respectable business, but $500,000 generally is
worked in
really good
documentary.
for a documentary.
So I used to do the deals for international, not do them, but I did acquisitions, but we did the deals for international distribution on television. Documentaries do not make any money. If you want to make money, that's not your field. However, this is very invigorating for documentary. HBO went through a time where HBO was sort of the bastion of documentaries and the savior of documentaries. But what we're seeing this year theatrically is incredibly optimistic for the future of the medium. I'm very delighted. Thank you for highlighting these beautiful films.
Yes, they're all great. Well, I haven't seen Pope Francis, but the other 4 are great movies. Amongst all 4 of them, some of the best I've seen this year. So.
Were you a Whitney Houston music fan going in?
I was kind of thinking about it afterwards. I am of an age where I remember Whitney Houston was just like the biggest star that there was. It was like Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Oprah.
Sure.
That was about it. And Whitney Houston even predates Oprah by a little bit. So I was actually thinking, I certainly viewed that from one way as I remembered her at the height of her popularity and fame, and I remember sort of the downfall, although I didn't know the details of a lot of it. But I'm also very intrigued to hear from people that didn't. It's like when I hear about how popular the Beatles were. That's just anecdotal. I don't know the experience of that. So I wonder how it plays to people that, this is when they talk about how successful she was. It's just kind of a description. You don't have that
visceral
connection or that memory of knowing, like, well, yeah, I remember The Bodyguard. I heard it on the radio every day. I saw the posters, I knew about it in the sense of, like, I remembered when she was by far the biggest star, at least here in the United States, in music.
My family listened to the Beatles. I actually, weirdly enough, watched Yellow Submarine this weekend, and I had a lot of trouble connecting to it.
Yeah.
But I appreciated it, but it was sort of from a distance. Whitney, I love vocalists too. I just thought, oh, this woman had this there's this thematic thread in this movie about this idea of a monsoon, right? And I thought, like, that was her talent. Yeah. Her talent was so overwhelming. I bet it was just so difficult to carry that almost helped to destroy her. Anyway, we'll talk about Whitney more later. Let's talk about the summer movie report.
That's right. Jurassic World tops Deadpool 2 for the number 3 spot. I think it's safe to say that Infinity War and Incredibles 2 are cemented there at 1 and 2. Well, you never know. Something could come in and just take us crazy by surprise. But looking down the schedule, I don't see anything that could quite do what either one of those movies has done. Fallen Kingdom, Deadpool 2, switch spots. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp, we talked about this last week. Where's it going to fall? It jumps in at number 7. It'll probably crack, number 6 pretty soon, and then we'll see how it does compared to Solo. Breaking In drops out of the top 10. That was, it's been hanging around since Mother's Day. So sad to see Breaking In go. It's been around with us since May, and then we'll see how the other movies on that chart fare compared to this week's releases, which we'll talk about right before we go. But yeah, Jurassic World jumps over Deadpool 2, both internationally and domestically.
Well, how do you feel about that emotionally?
That's fine. At this point, I can't emotionally tie myself to the performance of movies because I'm just going to drive myself crazy.
Well, that's the summer. Let's look at the domestic and worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. Top 5 remains the same domestically, again, except for Jurassic World and Deadpool 2 swapping spots. And then Ocean's 8, which took another drop this weekend. It's out of the top 5, but dropped less than 40% again this weekend. The holds on that movie have been very strong. It jumps over Peter Rabbit. It's now number 9 at the 2018 box office. So good, again, Ocean's 8 is one of those that it opened strongly, but it's been holding very well for a movie of its size. It's over $125 million. It'll probably settle in around, 140-ish. So that's great.
I'm curious how Warner Brothers is going to move forward with that. Do you think they'll, because I don't want to do a spoiler for it, but they left room for a collaboration between the Ocean's 11's crew and the 13's, 12's, and the 8's.
Yeah.
I'm curious how they'll sort of move forward with this franchise. Will they stick with these and do a 9?
I don't know.
Or
I
7?
almost kind of feel like this was a good. I liked Ocean's 8. I thought it was a good heist movie, but it didn't leave me like, I never really walked out of any of the Ocean's movies saying like, oh my god, I need a sequel to that. I guess if they program it right, if you get all the A-list stars that you can get, if you get all of the like big stars from 11, 12, and 13, and the ones and the big stars from 8, that movie's budget is going to be $300 million.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Part of me says that might be fun, and part of me also says like, you know what? They pulled it off this time. It was perfectly enjoyable. Why mess with a good thing?
I think that's how they felt about the heist. Inside the world of the film.
That's true.
Let's look at the world, and then let's talk about the only ocean I care about right now.
That's right. I mentioned Jurassic World passing $1 billion. It's the 3rd movie this year to do so. If you look at the last 2 years have only seen 4 films pass the $1 billion mark. And since 2010, the most we've seen pass $1 billion in 1 year is 5 back in 2015. So here we are halfway through the year. We already have 3. Are there going to be 4? Are there going to be 5? Are there going to be 6? Who knows? Again, it's all a numbers game. You never know what kind of heat a movie's going to get. But 3 this year already over the $1 billion mark. That's not bad. And Roth, look at that. At number 10, we've been talking about it for a while. At the tail end of its release, Solo has enough gas to peak in at number 10 on the worldwide box office list. That is as high as it's going to get. Something's going to knock it off soon. Maybe it's Ant-Man and the Wasp. Maybe we'll see how Skyscraper does. Who knows? But for now, Solo has managed to
Maybe it's Mission Impossible.
Maybe it's Mission Impossible. Exactly. So for at least a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4, Solo manages to claw its way onto the worldwide top 10 chart. It's a hollow victory, but it's a victory.
Is it a holodeck victory?
It's a holodeck victory. We're mixing franchises now.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm
It's
sorry.
all right.
Is that not? You know what? Can we not just mix franchises?
I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think
Really?
Star Wars and Star Trek would go well together.
Not literally. I don't want a Star Wars, Star
Oh.
Trek crossover movie. I just mean in the sense, like, can't we all just be friends and mix our metaphors?
We could. It'd be very confusing, though.
All right. You know what I'm not confused about? How strongly I feel about the Meg people. It's coming out soon. It's
Look at
coming
that,
out in
Roth.
32 days.
32 days. We're almost a month away. Almost less than a month away, Roth, from the Meg. We're at 32 days. It seems like forever ago. And also yesterday that we began this countdown. We're just under a month. How excited are you, Roth?
I'm so excited. I'm going to have earned this because we'll be through Comic-Con.
It's true.
About a week after Comic-Con, probably when we can see the film.
Hopefully, yeah.
Assuming they screen a little bit earlier. More and more ads are coming out for it. They are not backing away from the camp in the advertising, which
No.
gives me so much hope for the film itself. They're doing little riffs on Jaws, she's coming. I'm assuming it's a girl.
Mm-hmm.
She is. She's coming up, and there's like a series of swimmers. I'm worried a little bit because I think I am now circled around, and it was a joke, and now I am so legitimately excited about the film.
I don't want you to set yourself up for failure.
I don't want to be disappointed.
No, I don't want you to be disappointed. Well, 32 days from now, the world will find out if we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. But this weekend,
they'll see The Rock do Die Hard.
They'll see The Rock do Die Hard for Skyscraper, which I think we will have a review for. Maybe
I believe we will.
Yeah, we'll have a review for right here. And then the Dracula's back. Hotel Transylvania 3. Is he playing Dracula? I have to catch up to the other two before I see this one.
Can I make a confession?
Yes.
Haven't seen any of them.
He's definitely a vampire, and he looks like
vampire.
Dracula. I'm gonna say he's Dracula.
And he has a daughter.
He has a daughter. There's
and a grandkid.
Blob. All kinds of monsters.
I believe there's a mummy.
There's probably a mummy. Anyway, Hotel Transylvania 3, that opens wide this weekend. And as I mentioned before, Sorry to Bother You expands vastly from, I think, 16 to 700 screens. So if you're looking for a movie that's going to challenge you, and again, probably the most unique movie I've seen this year, check out Sorry to Bother You.
Check out Sorry to Bother You. Also, if you're just a fan of cinema, because a lot of times, even if something isn't your cup of tea, there's a lot to explore in it about how filmmaking is used by different artists to deliver their message. And this is one that doesn't adhere to rules, but it is playing with them. So I say check it out and unpack it, and then consider if it has legs.
You got them all in.
I got them all in.
That's good.
Double cheese it.
All right. Thanks for watching.